It was 1:57 p.m. when Daniel Whitmore's voice sliced through my earpiece. "Get that black maid out of sight now." His tone was sharp, almost panicked as his gaze locked on the man stepping out of a sleek black Bentley in front of the Sterling Grand. That man was Victor Zhang, the Chinese billionaire, whose signature could shift the fate of this hotel overnight. The marble lobby gleamed under the crystal chandeliers, every inch staged for perfection, except for me pushing a cleaning cart along the edge of the room. Zhang's entourage swept through the glass doors like a tide of tailored suits. Daniel stepped forward, extending his hand with a grin that looked a little too tight. Then Zhang spoke fast, fluid Mandarin. I didn't need to see Daniel's face to know the panic had set in. His shoulders locked, the smile froze, and within seconds his hand drifted toward his phone for the translation app he thought could save him. From my corner, I heard every word Zhang said, and I knew instantly the Sterling Grand wasn't ready for this meeting. But I also knew something else I was. Daniel Whitmore wasn't the kind of man who lost control. In his 15 years climbing the luxury hospitality ladder from bellhop to general manager, he had cultivated a reputation for being unflappable. But standing in the center of the Sterling Grand's opulent lobby, with Victor Zhang speaking rapid Mandarin, just feet away his confidence was unraveling in real time. The Sterling Grand was no ordinary property. It was a century-old landmark in the heart of Boston, known for its hand-carved oak paneling, baccarat crystal chandeliers, and a guest list that read like a Fortune 500 directory. Victor Zhang wasn't here for the view. His conglomerate controlled over 40 luxury hotels across Asia and Europe, and rumors had been swirling for months that he was looking to expand into North America. If the Sterling could secure his investment, it would mean a multi-million-dollar infusion enough to restore the historic East Wing, modernize the suites, and cement the hotel's position as the city's crown jewel. That's why Daniel had spent the last 2 weeks orchestrating the visit like a Broadway production. Every department had been drilled on protocol. The chef imported tea from Fujian. Maintenance replaced every bulb in the lobby chandeliers just in case. Bell staff rehearsed greeting phrases in accented Mandarin. Daniel had even gone so far as to adjust the lobby's scent diffusers to emit a blend of osmanthus and white tea, subtle calming, and carefully chosen from a cultural preferences report he'd skimmed online. But what he hadn't done, what he'd outright dismissed, was arrange for a real Mandarin interpreter. 3 days earlier, the front desk manager, a soft-spoken woman named Valerie, had tentatively raised the question in their daily briefing. "Mr. Whitmore, I've heard Mr. Zhang prefers to conduct serious business in Mandarin. Should we arrange for a translator?" Daniel had waved her off. "His assistant told me he speaks fluent English. Besides, we've got AI translation on every tablet and phone in the building. State-of-the-art, practically human." Now watching the billionaire's brow furrow as Daniel's app mangled tones into gibberish, that misplaced confidence felt like a noose tightening around his neck. The first attempt at translation was an embarrassment. Zhang had asked about the hotel's readiness to meet specific cultural service expectations, but the app rendered it as how to prepare for Moon Festival in swimming pool. A junior member of Zhang's entourage stifled a laugh. Daniel's smile wavered, but he pressed on, leaning toward Zhang's assistant, an elegant woman in her 30s named Grace Lin, hoping for a lifeline. She translated Zhang's next sentence into polite but ambiguous English. "Mr. Zhang appreciates the architecture." Daniel's gut told him that wasn't the whole truth, and he was right. From where I stood half hidden behind a marble pillar, with my cleaning cart, I caught Zhang's actual words. "It's aesthetically fine, but I'm concerned they don't understand our operational priorities." I knew the difference wasn't just semantic. In high-stakes negotiations, subtext was everything. Zhang's choice of phrasing hinted at more than dissatisfaction, it was a warning shot. The tour began, and I trailed invisibly along the edges, moving from one hallway to the next under the guise of routine cleaning. The spa with its cedar sauna, the rooftop lounge with panoramic views of Boston Harbor, the presidential suite where Daniel bragged about the imported Italian marble. Through it all, Zhang spoke mostly to his team in Mandarin, his questions growing more technical: zoning, laws, tax incentives, competitive property valuations. Every time Grace provided partial translations, trimming details like a gardener pruning a hedge. And every time Daniel answered with the vague, overly rehearsed talking points, he'd prepared his ignorance of the missing details, widening the gap between them. By the time they reached the mahogany-paneled executive conference room, Daniel's silk tie was damp at the collar. The presentation, his grand finale, was supposed to seal the deal. The leather-bound packets were laid out, the digital slides queued. Then Zhang asked a question that cut straight to the bone. Given the recent municipal adjustments to vertical zoning allowances, how will your property's expansion strategy align with these new constraints, particularly in a mixed-use development scenario? Grace's translation softened the question to, Mr. Zhang wants to know about your long-term development plans. But I'd heard every layered detail in Mandarin, and I knew Daniel's answer wouldn't satisfy him. Daniel hesitated, flipping through his notes. We can have our legal department prepare a detailed response, he said finally. Zhang frowned, his lips moving quickly in Mandarin. Grace translated, he is wondering if you were fully prepared for this meeting. In that instant, the dynamic shifted. This wasn't just a hotel tour anymore. This was a test of competence, and Daniel was failing. He called for a 5-minute recess, ushering his top managers into the hallway like a surgeon wheeling a patient out of a failing operation. Voices overlapped in urgent whispers. The finance director admitted she couldn't handle the international tax portion. The events manager suggested pivoting to cultural hospitality packages. Someone even proposed calling a cousin who once took Mandarin in college. None of it would work. They had less than 3 minutes before Zhang would decide the sterling wasn't worth his time. That's when my choice crystallized. For 4 years, I'd kept my skills locked away. My Harvard diploma and Beijing University master's degree hanging in a tiny apartment instead of an office. I'd been told more than once to stay in my lane, that guests preferred housekeeping staff to be silent and invisible. And I'd complied, paying my student loans one slow installment at a time, watching men like Daniel bungle opportunities I could have salvaged. But watching this meeting collapse, I realized something. Zhang wasn't just evaluating the sterling. He was evaluating everyone in this building. If I stayed silent, the hotel would lose him, and I'd lose my shot at anything better. I took off my cleaning gloves, smoothed my uniform, and stepped toward the conference room door. Daniel was already back inside, launching into an apology about unexpected technical issues. Grace translated Zhang's curt reply about the importance of global readiness. The tension was thick enough to cut. I drew a breath, stepped into the doorway, and spoke Mandarin in a tone as precise and formal as any boardroom respected Mr. Zhang. I couldn't help overhearing your questions regarding the new foreign investment regulations. If you would allow, I may be able to assist with your concerns. The room went still. Daniel turned, his eyes narrowing. Not now, he hissed. But Zhang was already leaning forward, a spark of interest in his gaze. Please, he said in Mandarin, explain your understanding of the new zoning allowances. And just like that, the turning point had arrived, not just for the meeting, but for me. The second my words left my mouth, the atmosphere in the room shifted like a gust of wind through heavy curtains. Victor Zhang's sharp eyes locked on me, not with suspicion, but with the measured curiosity of a man who has just uncovered an unanticipated variable in a negotiation. Daniel Whitmore's face, however, told a different story, one of barely contained frustration. Housekeeping staff don't interrupt investor meetings. His expression screamed, even as he forced a smile in Zhang's direction. Zhang spoke again, his Mandarin fluid testing. Your pronunciation is native level. Where did you learn? I studied at Beijing University, I replied, meeting his gaze evenly. Master's degree in East Asian linguistics and international business. Around the table, members of Zhang's entourage exchanged looks, some impressed, others calculating. Grace Lin's professional facade cracked just enough to reveal surprise. She had been the sole linguistic authority in the room until this moment. Now she was an observer. Daniel stepped forward, interjecting in English. Ms. Carter, I supplied. Naomi Carter. Yes, Ms. Carter, Daniel said, his tone edged. Perhaps you could translate for me as I walk Mr. Zhang through the prepared presentation? I glanced at Zhang, then back at Daniel. With respect, sir, Mr. Zhang's questions go beyond the scope of what's in your slides. Daniel's jaw tightened. Just translate. Zhang, still watching me, ignored Daniel entirely. Tell me, he said in Mandarin, how does Boston's new vertical zoning allowance impact mixed-use developments with hospitality components? The air seemed to thicken. This was the question that had tripped Daniel earlier, the one Grace had reduced to a vague generality. I outlined the changes, the city's decision to permit structures up to 40 stories in designated commercial tourism overlap zones. The dual tax incentives for developments incorporating cultural exchange facilities. The comparative advantage over New York's more restrictive approach. As I spoke, Zhang leaned forward, his hands steepled, nodding at key points. This, Zhang said, finally turning to his associates, is the kind of operational awareness I expect from my partners. Grace translated for the English speakers, though she omitted the part about his disappointment with the hotel's earlier responses. Daniel's relief was visible, but it was mixed with something else: resentment. My presence had salvaged the conversation, but it had also exposed his lack of preparation. Zhang began to ask a series of rapid-fire questions: tax abatement timelines, cultural accommodation preferences for Chinese business travelers, even the feasibility of integrating WeChat Pay into the hotel's payment systems. I answered each without hesitation, drawing on both my academic training and years of quiet observation inside hotels like this one. Every response seemed to pull the meeting further from Daniel's control and closer into an orbit between Zhang and me. Then Zhang dropped the question that would change everything. In my experience, American hospitality groups misunderstand what luxury means to Chinese clients. What would you change about this property to better serve them? I hesitated, not because I didn't have answers, but because speaking them aloud meant crossing a line from translator to consultant. Daniel saw the danger instantly. "We can address that later," he cut in. But Zhang raised a hand, silencing him. "I'm asking Ms. Carter." The room seemed to lean toward me. The Sterling's design already aligns with certain feng shui principles. I began carefully, but there are gaps. No dedicated tea service, limited multi-generational suite options, digital payment systems that don't accommodate Chinese platforms. The art in the common areas reflects Western tastes exclusively. Adding curated Chinese works could signal cultural respect without sacrificing the property's historic character. One of Zhang's senior advisors jotted notes furiously. Grace translated for the room, her tone now tinged with reluctant admiration. Daniel's expression darkened to shade, but Zhang looked genuinely pleased. "You understand the nuances most overlook," he said in Mandarin. "Have you done this kind of advisory work before?" "In an academic capacity, yes," I answered. "In practice, not officially." Zhang sat back, considering me for a long moment before speaking to Daniel in English. "Mr. Whitmore, I would like Ms. Carter to remain in this meeting not only as translator, but as cultural advisor." It wasn't a suggestion, it was an order. Daniel's grip on the presentation remote tightened, but he forced a nod. "Of course." From there, the meeting took on a new rhythm. Zhang directed most of his comments to me. I responded in Mandarin, and Grace provided English translations for the rest of the team. We bypassed Daniel's prepared slides entirely, instead drilling down into real-time problem solving. Half an hour later, Zhang leaned back and said something in Mandarin that made his associates exchange knowing glances. Grace translated: "Mr. Zhang believes the Sterling has significant potential, provided it can demonstrate the ability to recognize and utilize talent effectively." The compliment was aimed at me, but the subtext was a razor against Daniel's pride. As the meeting wound down, Zhang reached into his jacket and withdrew a small black card embossed in gold. He handed it to me with both hands, a gesture of deep respect in Chinese culture. "My personal contact information," he said in Mandarin. "Should you ever wish to work with Zhang International, call me directly." I accepted it with a slight bow. "Thank you, Mr. Zhang. That would be an honor." Daniel's eyes flicked to the card, his smile stretched tight enough to crack porcelain. But the real surprise came after Zhang and his entourage left the room. Daniel shut the door, turned to me and said, "We need to talk about your future here. Now." It was the first time in 4 years he'd looked me directly in the eye. When I left the conference room that afternoon, the golden business card still warm in my pocket, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt exposed. 4 years of invisibility had vanished in less than an hour, replaced by a spotlight I hadn't asked for, but had secretly longed to step into. Daniel Whitmore trailed me into the hallway, the set of his jaw betraying an internal battle between irritation and calculation. The man had just watched his carefully engineered presentation dissolve under the weight of an unplanned, unscripted conversation, and yet that conversation had saved the day. "Ms. Carter," he began, his voice pitched low, "do you realize what you've just done?" "Yes," I said evenly. "I helped you salvage a meeting that was seconds away from imploding." His eyes narrowed. "And in the process, you undermined my authority in front of an international client." I didn't flinch. "Respectfully, Sir, Mr. Zhang wasn't evaluating your authority. He was evaluating the Sterling's readiness for global business. I simply gave him the answers he was looking for." We stopped outside the service elevator. A houseman pushing a cart of linens passed by, glancing between us, before disappearing around the corner. For the first time since I'd known him, Daniel seemed uncertain. "Where exactly did you learn to speak like that?" he asked, though I knew he'd already heard the answer in the meeting. "Beijing University, master's degree, international business and East Asian linguistics. Before that, Harvard." His brow furrowed. And you've been cleaning rooms I finished for him? Yes, because student loans don't wait for the perfect job offer. For a long moment, Daniel said nothing. Then in a tone stripped of its usual managerial polish, he admitted I didn't know. You never asked, I replied. That landed harder than I expected. He glanced toward the closed conference room doors as if replaying the past hour in his mind, the mistranslations, the dead air, the turning point. Come to my office after your shift, he said finally. We need to discuss possibilities. That was the first crack in a wall I'd been staring at for years. Later that evening, I lingered in the staff break room after clocking out. Conversations buzzed around me, housekeeping staff swapping notes on tricky guests, maintenance workers laughing over a broken ice machine, front desk clerks gossiping about Zhang's fleet of cars. Emma, the head of housekeeping, slid into the chair across from me. She'd been silent during the entire drama, watching from the back of the room. Now she leaned forward, her voice low. I had no idea, Naomi. About what? That you spoke Mandarin. That you knew all that stuff about zoning laws? Hell, that you went to Harvard. I shrugged. It never came up. Her gaze softened. Maybe it should have. The next morning, Daniel called an emergency department head meeting. I wasn't supposed to be there, but Emma insisted I sit in. The air was charged not with panic this time, but with the uneasy buzz of a team realizing they'd nearly lost everything. Daniel stood at the head of the long oak table, hands clasped. Yesterday was a success, he began, but not because of our preparation. In fact, we were one bad translation away from losing the Zhang deal entirely. Several managers shifted uncomfortably. It was saved by someone whose skills we had no idea we possessed. His eyes flicked toward me. Naomi Carter. I felt every gaze land on me, some curious, some skeptical, a few openly surprised. Daniel continued. This has made me realize we may have other untapped capabilities within our staff. Skills that could be critical in situations we can't predict. The food and beverage director frowned. Are you suggesting we start interviewing every employee about their hobbies? I'm suggesting, Daniel said, his voice firm, that we stop assuming people are defined solely by their current job title. The room went quiet. Over the next week, something remarkable happened. Word of my impromptu intervention spread beyond the management offices, trickling down to every floor and department. The bell captain stopped me in the lobby to ask about my time in Beijing. A sous chef cornered me in the staff kitchen to practice Mandarin greetings. Even the security chief, who'd once walked past me 100 times without a nod, asked my opinion on cross-cultural guest interactions. For the first time, people looked me in the eye. But the shift wasn't just about me. I began to notice the way managers started asking their teams different questions. Do you speak any other languages? Have you worked in another industry before? What skills do you have that we might be overlooking? Some of the answers stunned them. The night auditor was a certified accountant in her home country. A valet had once been a sommelier at a Michelin-starred restaurant. A maintenance worker was finishing his engineering degree. It was as if the walls of the hotel had been lined with hidden doors all along, and someone had finally started opening them. One afternoon, Daniel stopped me in the lobby. Zhang's team sent over the preliminary contract, he said, a rare note of satisfaction in his voice. They also requested you be the primary liaison for their visits going forward. I tried to keep my expression neutral, but inside my pulse kicked up. I'd be happy to. As he walked away, I caught a glimpse of something in his posture, less arrogance, more awareness. The man who once told a staff member to stay in their lane was beginning to understand that lanes can be widened or eliminated altogether. It wasn't just his perspective that had shifted, it was the Sterling Grand's. 2 weeks after the Rung meeting, the Sterling Grand felt different. Not in the way you notice when the seasons change or when a new art piece appears in the lobby. This was subtler but deeper, a shift in how people looked at one another. Conversations in staff corridors lingered a little longer. Supervisors asked more questions that had nothing to do with mop buckets or inventory logs. And for the first time since I'd started working here, my name was being said in offices I'd never stepped into. The official confirmation of Zhang International's investment came in the form of a thick embossed envelope delivered to Daniel's office. I wasn't in the room when he opened it, but I heard later from Valerie at the front desk that he read the letter twice, then quietly exhaled like a man who'd been holding his breath for a month. That same afternoon, Daniel called me upstairs. Close the door, he said when I entered his office. It was the kind of instruction you only give when the conversation will change something. He leaned forward across the mahogany desk. Naomi, I've been thinking about what happened in that meeting. about the fact that you were able to bridge a gap none of us even knew existed, and about the fact that someone with your education and skill set has been cleaning guest bathrooms for 4 years while I've been oblivious. There was no sarcasm in his voice, no defensiveness, just an honest recognition. I want to make you an offer, he continued. A new role, director of international guest relations. You'd work directly with me, liaise with high-profile international clients, and help shape our cultural hospitality strategy. Salary, benefits, and office on the executive floor. It's yours if you want it. I didn't answer right away. My mind flickered back to the last 4 years, the endless rejection emails, the condescension from managers who never learned my last name, the humiliation of being told guests prefer it when housekeeping is invisible. And now here was Daniel, the man who once ordered me out of sight, offering me a position I'd dreamed of since grad school. I want it, I said finally, my voice steady, but on one condition. His brows lifted. Name it. I want to create a program here, something permanent. A way to identify the hidden skills of every employee. Language abilities, education, and professional experience from other industries. Everything. We can't afford to overlook talent like this again. Daniel studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Agreed. We'll build it together. The announcement went public a week later. The internal memo read, Promotion announcement, Naomi Carter, Director of International Guest Relations. Effective immediately, Naomi will oversee the Sterling Grand's international client experience strategy, leveraging her expertise in cross-cultural communication and hospitality. She will also spearhead a new initiative to identify and develop the hidden talents within our workforce. When I walked into the break room that afternoon, conversation stopped mid-sentence. Then Emma stood and started clapping. One by one, the others joined in until the applause filled the space like a rising tide. The first test of my new role came faster than I expected. Zhang International sent word that a delegation of Japanese executives would be visiting the property to discuss potential partnerships in the retail complex slated for the adjacent lot. They were known for valuing meticulous preparation, precise etiquette, and subtle but crucial cultural cues. 2 years ago, I would have been polishing bathroom tiles during such a visit. Now I was coordinating everything from the welcome tea ceremony to the seating arrangement in the conference room. I assembled a cross-department team, pulling in staff whose abilities I learned about only recently through casual conversations and my growing hidden talents list. Marisol from housekeeping, fluent in Japanese, from her childhood in Kyoto. Brian from maintenance, who'd studied architecture and could speak intelligently about structural modifications. Even George from valet, who had a background in international logistics. Watching them in action was like seeing puzzle pieces click together, pieces we hadn't even realized we had. The delegation left with handshakes, bows, and sincere compliments on the Sterling's cultural acumen. 2 days later, Daniel forwarded me an email from Zhang himself, impressed with your new director's ability to mobilize diverse talent. This confirms our decision to invest was correct. But the opportunity wasn't just in the title or the projects, it was in the way people had started to see me. Not as Naomi from housekeeping, but as someone whose perspective mattered. One evening, as I was packing up to leave my office, Daniel stopped by the doorway. You know, he said, this program you're building, it's changing how I hire. I used to look at resumes for specific roles. Now I'm starting to look for people who can do the role and something more. Something unexpected. That's the point, I said. We've been sitting on a goldmine of skills and all we had to do was ask. He nodded. I should have asked sooner. I thought of Zhang's words in that first meeting. A hotel unable to communicate effectively with international clients may not be prepared to serve an international clientele. The same principle applied inward. If we couldn't recognize the full potential of our own people, we'd never be truly ready for the future. The Sterling Grand was preparing for expansion, now an entire new wing designed with international guests in mind. And for the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't just working a job. I was building something. The opportunity had begun with a single moment in a tense meeting. But it was turning into a platform not just for me, but for anyone in this hotel whose brilliance had been hidden behind a uniform. 3 months into my new role, I barely recognized the version of myself who used to slip down service hallways unnoticed. My days were no longer measured in the number of rooms cleaned or linens folded, but in meetings with international partners, staff training sessions, and strategy calls with Daniel and the executive team. The transformation wasn't just professional, it was personal. The first week as Director of International Guest Relations, I caught myself apologizing for speaking up in meetings. By the third week, I stopped apologizing. By the second month, I was leading them. I'd always known my education and skills were valuable, but for years I'd carried them like fragile glass, something to protect from scrutiny, because every rejection had taught me that showing too much could backfire. Now I wielded them like tools, confidently, deliberately. The Hidden Talents program was at the center of this shift. What started as a side initiative quickly became a cornerstone of the Sterling Grand's operations. Every department contributed to a growing internal database of employee skills certifications and experiences. Some discoveries were game-changing. The night porter Hassan turned out to be fluent in Arabic, French, and German, a triple asset for international conferences. Sophia from the banquet staff was a trained pastry chef, allowing the kitchen to add an authentic French patisserie section for high-profile events. Even the front desk trainee Marco was an amateur videographer whose footage now featured in the hotel's promotional campaigns. Watching these transformations unfold in others was almost more satisfying than my own. Each time someone stepped into a new role or showcased a hidden skill, I saw in their eyes the same mix of disbelief and pride I'd felt the day Bang handed me his card. With growth came challenges. Not everyone welcomed the changes. Some managers resisted sharing their staff with other departments, fearing disruption. Others quietly questioned whether elevating frontline employees might undermine traditional hierarchies. I addressed it head-on in a manager's meeting. When talent is locked away in a job description, I told them the entire hotel loses. Guests don't care about our internal silos. They care about the service and expertise they experience. If we can deliver more of that, everyone wins. It wasn't an overnight victory, but over time, results spoke louder than skepticism. Occupancy rates rose. Guest satisfaction scores for staff helpfulness hit record highs. And perhaps most telling, employee turnover began to drop. Outside of work, the changes rippled into my personal life. For the first time since grad school, I was able to make more than the minimum payment on my student loans. I moved out of my cramped one-bedroom apartment into a small but sunlit condo within walking distance of the hotel. My mother, who had spent years urging me to find a job that matches your degrees, finally stopped asking when I was going to use them. There was also a quiet, steady boost in my own sense of belonging. The uniform I wore, now a tailored charcoal suit with a sterling silver lapel pin, was more than just clothing. It was a symbol of visibility. People saw me. They asked for my input. They respected it. One of the most pivotal moments came during a quarterly review meeting with Shang International's North American board. I was the only Sterling Grand representative besides Daniel. As the conversation shifted to cultural integration strategies, one board member asked about the sustainability of our approach, whether the Hidden Talents program was a temporary PR effort or a structural change. I didn't hesitate. This is not a program, I said. It's a philosophy. Recognizing and using the full capabilities of our people isn't an extra. It's our competitive advantage. It's the reason we can adapt faster than our competitors, because we're not just hiring for a role, we're hiring for the whole person. There was a pause, and then Zhang himself on video from Shanghai smiled. That is precisely why I invested, he said. Internally, Daniel had shifted too. The man who once saw me as an interruption now consulted me on key hiring decisions and strategic partnerships. He began attending some of the talent development workshops himself, quietly sitting in the back and listening. One afternoon, as we wrapped up a training for multilingual guest service protocols, he pulled me aside. You know, Naomi, he said, the Sterling was a good hotel before, but now it feels alive. And that's largely because you had the courage to speak up in that meeting. I didn't see it then, but I do now. It struck me how far we'd both come, him and his willingness to admit he'd been wrong, me and my refusal to shrink when the moment came. The final proof of my growth came during a crisis eerily similar to the one that had started it all. A Saudi royal family delegation arrived unexpectedly days ahead of schedule. Their advance team had sent over complex requests in Arabic, many involving cultural protocols and security considerations. No one on the immediate management team spoke the language except Hassan, our night porter. A year ago, someone might have tried to muddle through with Google Translate. Instead, I called Hassan into my office, briefed him, and handed him the lead on communications for the visit. 3 days later, the delegation left glowing reviews in our private guest feedback system, praising the unmatched cultural understanding of the Sterling staff. Hassan's confidence skyrocketed, and I submitted the paperwork for his promotion to guest services coordinator the same week. Seeing him step into that role felt like closing a loop. What Zhang had done for me, I was now doing for others. By the end of that quarter, I realized something fundamental. My growth wasn't just about climbing a career ladder. It was about shifting the way I saw my own agency. I wasn't waiting for opportunity to find me anymore. I was creating it for myself and for others. And that more than any title or paycheck was the real measure of success. The Sterling Grand's grand ballroom shimmered under the glow of hundreds of candles, their light reflecting off crystal glassware and polished silver. It was the annual International Hospitality Gala, an event the hotel hosted to honor industry leaders, cultural partners, and distinguished guests. 3 months ago, I would have been stationed in the service corridor, ready to replace any tablecloth that got spilled on. Tonight, I stood at the front of the room, microphone in hand, introduced as the Director of International Guest Relations. I scanned the crowd, executives in tuxedos, cultural delegates in traditional attire, media cameras flashing. Somewhere near the back, Daniel Whitmore stood with Zhang International's regional vice president. When our eyes met, he gave a single nod, the kind that says more than words, "You belong here." Ladies and gentlemen, I began tonight is about more than fine dining and business deals. It's about the bridges we build not just between countries, but between people. Those bridges aren't built from marble or steel. They're built from understanding, from recognizing the value that each person brings to the table. As I spoke, my mind replayed the day everything changed, the tense conference room, the mistranslated questions, the moment I stepped forward in defiance of 4 years of silence. I spent years working here without anyone knowing I could speak Mandarin or that I'd studied international business, I told the room. Not because I was hiding it, but because no one thought to ask. And I didn't push because I'd learned that sometimes in the wrong environment, showing your full self can feel like stepping into the line of fire. A murmur of recognition moved through the audience. I knew some of them had felt that same invisibility in their own careers. But one meeting changed everything, not just for me, but for this hotel. That day I learned something I will never forget. The most dangerous waste in any organization is the talent it doesn't even know it has. I saw Zhang smile faintly, lifting his glass in silent agreement. After the speech, guests mingled and networked, and I found myself in conversation with people who months earlier would have walked past me without notice. The Japanese trade delegation head thanked me for our cultural preparations. A French hotelier asked for advice on multilingual staff integration. And then there was Emma, still head of housekeeping, but now an enthusiastic member of our talent initiatives steering committee. You know, she said the survey we did turned up a laundry attendant who used to be a corporate lawyer in Brazil. Can you believe that? Yes, I said, I can believe it. The next morning as I walked through the lobby, I noticed something that made me stop. Near the concierge desk, Hassan, the former night porter, was speaking in fluent French to a family from Paris. His posture was confident, his smile easy. The concierge stood nearby, letting him lead the interaction. This was what change looked like. Not a speech or a memo, but 100 small moments where someone was allowed to step fully into their skill set. Later that week, I received an email from Zhang himself, Naomi. I'm hosting a global summit in Shanghai next spring. I'd like you to attend as both a representative of the Sterling Grand and as a speaker on cross-cultural talent development. I believe your perspective will inspire others as it inspired me. I sat back in my chair staring at the words. 4 years ago, I'd been invisible in my own workplace. Now my voice was being invited to the global stage. On the night I accepted Zhang's invitation, I wrote a note and pinned it inside my desk drawer. It read, "The moment you stop hiding your value is the moment the world starts making space for it." It wasn't just for me. It was for anyone who ever felt unseen, underestimated, or trapped in a role that didn't match their potential. The Sterling Grand would always be a hotel to our guests. But for those of us who worked there, it had become something else entirely, a place where the walls between positions were a little thinner, where the distance between staff and leader could be crossed in a single conversation if someone was willing to listen. That was the real legacy of what happened in that conference room. Zhang's investment brought money and prestige, yes. But the deeper change was in our culture, a willingness to see, to ask, and to believe that brilliance could be found in the most unexpected places. And every time I walked past the housekeeping carts in the service hallways, I reminded myself that somewhere behind one of those carts might be the next great idea, the next breakthrough negotiation, The next Naomi Carter just waiting for the right moment to step forward. In the end, the most valuable lesson I learned wasn't about language business or even cultural diplomacy. It was about visibility. Skills, degrees, and experience mean little if they remain hidden in the shadows of assumption. For years, I believed that staying quiet was the safest route that my time would come if I simply worked hard and waited. But silence doesn't open doors. It keeps them locked. The Zhang meeting taught me that opportunities often arrive disguised as crises. And when they do, you can either protect your comfort or step forward into discomfort and possibility. That day, I chose the latter. It also showed me the responsibility leaders have to truly know their people. If we don't look beyond titles and uniforms, we risk wasting talent that could change everything. The Sterling Grand's transformation wasn't about one person's promotion, it was about a collective shift towards seeing each other fully. Because when people are seen, they contribute more than their job description. They bring their whole selves, and that changes not just meetings or hotels, but lives. You don't have to run a luxury hotel to apply this lesson. Whether you manage a team, volunteer in your community, or lead a family, the principle is the same: look deeper. Ask questions that go beyond the role someone plays in front of you. Start small. Learn what languages your colleagues speak, what careers they had before, what passions they pursue after hours. Create spaces where those skills can be shared and valued. And if you're the one with hidden abilities, don't wait for permission to use them. The right moment may never announce itself. It may look like a problem no one else can solve. That's your cue. Because the world is full of Naomi Carters waiting for their chance. Sometimes you're the one who needs to step forward. Other times, you're the one who needs to invite them in.